Archie and Friends 4. We see Sabrina thinking that the new vampire in town is handsome. She's told to try a little flirting and drops her hanky near him. He just walks away whistling, even though this has been a thing since the 50s. And it's said that maybe he's a little dense. Unrealistically, we don't see him react and take offense to that. And instead, he cuts ahead to the next day where a new mummy at school says that he just likes looking at Sabrina. And his name is Milton. Sabrina puts on an outfit hoping it'll get his attention. So far, the only thing interesting about this generic, typical story is that the people around her look weird. And that's not exactly hard to come up with. She calls him a cutie and he just says hello and walks away cheerfully. The next day in school, the mummy asks her to go to the winter carnival with him. So she humors him, and he unrealistically faints because he's that much of a wimp. Sabrina wouldn't have so much trouble if she just asked the guy out herself. It's not the 40s. It's not that old story of Archie where Betty said to a future Betty that girls can't ask out guys, and she was glad things have changed since then. At the carnival, Milton dances terribly and she falls and tells him to take her home. When she's surprisingly nice enough to say he can kiss her after that, he takes off the bandages and reveals that he was the vampire guy all along. I thought the name Milton sounded familiar. It sounded like it was the name of this guy from the Sabrina Holiday Spectacular story. But I was wondering if it was just early installment weirdness where at first they called the mummy Milton instead of him because they couldn't decide. Why not, when already this whole Gravestone Heights thing seems sloppy to me, because I don't feel like I saw the story where her aunts decided to move there. That's what makes it a bit off-putting and hard to get invested in. That this comes out of complete nowhere. Convolutedly. Rather than him simply explaining like I expected that he dressed like a mummy because he was way too nervous to ask her out, and wanted her to reject someone she didn't know, or maybe get to like him for his personality and not his looks. Instead he explains that because vampires can't be out in the day, during the day he dresses like a mummy so that he can attend day school like everyone else. Except he never dressed like a mummy in the Holiday Spectacular issue. Not to mention, in the entire franchise before this, we've never seen vampires need to dress like mummies out in the daytime. He does say that he's very shy and it's easier to talk to her with the bandages on. Okay, so it's both explanations. While I can accept the idea that a vampire could dress like a mummy to stay out in the day, it's just confusing to do it in this franchise because it comes out of nowhere. I wish he explained he was a different type of vampire from most of the vampires she sees. He's more sympathetic and interesting than Harvey because he's shy, and he's a vampire. And to keep things from being needlessly dark, it seems like they're doing absolutely nothing with him being a vampire. Not even a needless drama where they have to break up because he's a vampire and he became elderly for some forgettable, contrived reason, like in Wizards of Waverly Place. We don't see him drinking blood, so it's just for decoration. I'm glad I finally read the story where she first met Milton. I wish I read it before the Holiday Spectacular. So this story was about Sabrina first meeting Milton, the vampire that she has a crush on. The actual plot was really mundane and generic. Sabrina meets this guy at school, and she wants to date him, but this other guy asks her out. It only becomes fantastical because it turns out the guy she wasn't interested in and humored was actually that guy she wanted all along, and he was just dressed up like a mummy, because he was too shy and it's easier to talk to her with the bandages on. Even though the whole reason a guy would be shy and not want to talk to a girl is that he wouldn't want her to judge him. He would be scared of what she would say. So, unless he was ashamed of his looks, it wouldn't make any sense that bandages would make it easier. There's really nothing to the plot. I forget if Sabrina even used magic. That was boring. Archie's Foul Jughead Comics, 1993-46. A cheerleader tells Sabrina that their team needs some cute mascots like the ones their opponents have. I guess she'll screw up. She creates some, or gets some friends of Hilda's from the other realm. The girl's impressed, and the story ends with her saying that she just couldn't tell her that they weren't costumes. Well, at least she didn't do a terrible job. Archie and Friends 5, 1982. Sabrina asks someone how he has the time to hang out at the soda shop because he has to study for the exam tomorrow. The pointlessly bad-looking character doesn't want her to even say study, and says who needs to study when you have friends like Clara. Sabrina waits a few panels being judgmental of her, when Sabrina's the type of person who would abuse her magic on Amy all the time, or anyone trying to date Harvey. Clara says she's always had a crush on him, and he doesn't have the patience to study and wants her to get the test answers for him. So she gave them the answers so that he could pass the test. Sabrina whines that that's cheating when it's none of her business what he does in his life. I wish I knew what class she's talking about. If it's literally just magic class because the blackboard says hex exam tomorrow, then that means there's really nothing wrong with what she did. He doesn't actually need to be great at magic and know a lot about it. He's tricking the teacher, but so what? That teacher doesn't even look sympathetic. Clara says that Wally said he'd take her out if she did it, and usually acts like he doesn't even see her. Naturally. Sabrina shows up at class the next day, and Clara whispers to her that she won't tell Miss Reaper. The answers are multiple choice, so she doesn't remember what they were. If you want to have a character be sympathetic while preaching a moral point to the audience, maybe don't have them look mad about it. It can make her look like a jerk who's getting too worked up over something that's none of her business. She should just look sad instead. The teacher is impressed by how fast Wally got the tests done. She thanks the girls and sees the cheat sheet near Ida's desk. And her dialogue is written to make a pun just because she said I, when that's a very common word. At least the writer chose the ugliest possible character to mistreat unfairly. But I still hate reading this. I still feel sorry for her and hate the teacher. She gives her a 0 on her exam right away, instead of simply casting a spell to find out for an absolute fact who the last person to hold the cheat sheet was. Sure, it's inconvenient that the sheet fell on the floor so easily. You'd think Sabrina would have known that this happened right away, since she's in the same classroom as her. But instead, she gets told what happened at Frankie's house. She should have seen what happened in the classroom, because then the pacing wouldn't be dragged down by her being told what we already saw. Sabrina says that Ida sits behind Wally, so Clara decides to tell the teacher what she did. The teacher reveals a twist. None of Wally's answers were right. What Clara saw her writing down was everyone's grade averages for the term instead. Clara doesn't care that her date will probably be cancelled from this because she'd rather be with her friends than that jerk. And the hex teacher has an annoying line. This was a story where Sabrina's friend Clara was told to find out the answers to a test by someone that she wants to date, and she agrees because this is the only way she can get his attention, as opposed to asking Sabrina to make her look pretty. Why should I care that he's trying to cheat on a magic test? I mean, mortals can get along just fine without magic, so it really seems unnecessary. And eventually it turns out that none of his answers were right anyways. This was a very generic plot. I'm sure plenty of other franchises have already done this. Did Sabrina even use magic at any point? What's the point? Archie and Friends 6, 1992. Sabrina calls out for a kid named Xavier, just like an earlier character in Wedding or Not, telling him to come back or else she'll quit being the head camp counselor. Why does she think that'll work as a threat against the brat? I guess she thinks he likes her. He conveniently teleports right back to her. She wonders where he's been and calls him out as rotten. And he says he's just been spending time with some mortals. As long as he's being nice to them, that's pretty sweet. Sabrina says they have rules at this camp. One of the kids gets sick out of nowhere, and Ida's sick too. Sabrina calls Hilda about it, and Hilda assumes it's a specific virus hex, and says she'll zap up her antidote, because apparently she has a doctorate in that kind of thing, which makes sense since she's been alive for so long. Sabrina thanks her, and Hilda teleports to her, but the antidote only makes them worse, and she assumes it must be a foreign disease. Hilda ends up sick, and only Sabrina and Xavier aren't. Xavier reveals he was with mortals, and Hilda assumes that Xavier brought in a mortal virus. That doesn't explain why he and Sabrina aren't sick too. Are they both immune? But then turns out the virus can be cured by eating mortal food. For no reason at all. That was stupid. This story was about the witch campers at Sabrina's camp getting sick because of a mortal virus a kid brought in. And then somehow the cure is mortal food. As usual for the Gravestone series, there wasn't enough magic. That misses the point. I'm more interested in what Xavier did around those mortal kids than the actual story, which for the most part could have just taken place on Earth. Other than their designs and what the ridiculous cure was, they might as well all have been mortal kids who got sick. Archie Comics Digest 124. Sabrina says Hilda really enjoys taping accidents with her camcorder while she's flying on a broom. That's an inventive way to take advantage of flying around. Too bad for her that her broom crashes into some hanging sheets when she wasn't looking. Sabrina hopes she learned from this. And Hilda says she should get a camcorder for Sabrina so that she could tape her accidents. Why would Hilda want an accident that she went through to be taped? That'd be embarrassing. Apparently, she's so used to enjoying seeing mishaps that she just assumes Sabrina would like to re-watch hers. And she loves her enough that she wants her to get to do that. Archie and Friends 7, 1992. Sabrina tells her aunt that she made a magical facial mask that'll keep her looking young for years. She says her aunt should try one. It makes up for offending them by lying that she was kidding and hopes she looks half as good as them when she's their age. Hilda looks in the mirror at her wrinkles and decides to give herself a facial. She tries to remember what she used to mix together to make a facial and fails, which tries to explain why she decides to use Sabrina's instead. I don't know why she stopped using Witch's youth facial cream so long that she forgot how to make it if it actually works. And she cares about looking young. She uses magic to give herself a younger outfit instead of pointing to make herself look younger, and plans on going to the soda shop to look for guys. And Zelda says that either the facial went bad or she's gone bonkers. Hilda would have heard that and asked what she meant, preventing the entire plot if the facial is supposed to work a lot faster than this. At first I assumed it just had a delay. She goes to Sabrina's class and apologizes for being late, even though she never goes to that class, and says she's the new girl in town as the students laugh at her. The teacher says he'll check with the principal on this later, and eventually, Zelda tells Sabrina to slip something in her drink to return Hilda's mind to normal. Hilda drinks something and stops thinking she's a teenager. I thought she became younger because she just used youth cream and naturally assumed that it worked on her. So it's confusing that Hilda doesn't remember what's going on now. And the story insists on ending without explaining why the cream didn't turn Hilda into a teenager. This story by Dan Parent feels arbitrary by the end because it never explains why Hilda still looks old after using youth cream. Hilda gets made insecure about her old appearance by Sabrina, so she uses her magic cream that Sabrina specifically said is to make a witch look bewitching. And yet it does nothing for Hilda's appearance and only makes her think she's a teenager, which embarrasses Sabrina with that useless cream, while she's oblivious to how much she's embarrassing herself, never getting offended at the classmates laughing or being directly insulted, somehow. So it's not too mean, but it's a very confusing story. Maybe I was supposed to take Sabrina at her exact words. It didn't make Hilda look better because it doesn't do that. It just keeps the witch from looking even older. So a cream to keep Hilda the same age wouldn't have made her look younger. A cream that keeps the witch bewitching wouldn't help Hilda because she doesn't look bewitching to begin with. Sabrina made things confusing though by saying that her aunts should try that cream, which implied that it would make them younger, and would make them look prettier, because otherwise why should they even bother using the cream if it's too late? Once again, this was a story in the arc that doesn't take advantage of Sabrina's magic. She doesn't use it once. But the story didn't have me realize that when I was reading it, as Hilda was the main character, and it was taking advantage of her being a witch. She could have used magic to brainwash Hilda into deciding to go home. But maybe it's believable that she didn't because she doesn't want to brainwash her aunts for any reason. Archie and Friends 8, 1992 series. We started with Jerome the Medusa guy and Sabrina saying stilted dialogue to explain to the audience why they're at the library without actually talking to the audience. They're in study hall to come up with a booth idea for the school carnival this weekend. It sounds like a creative idea for a plot. I never heard of any school carnivals. And Sabrina's stiltedly saying that Mrs. Reaper recommended them to be in charge of the junior class booth. At this point, it would have actually been better to show Mrs. Reaper telling them this exposition in the first panel, and then cut to them at the library. And somehow, despite all their talk in front of the librarian, she doesn't shush them. Sabrina says optimistically that the money they're gonna raise will go to a good cause, to help the tombless. Except this is the other realm. Witches could just zap up tombs. So this wouldn't happen. Then Ida yells while running up to them and gets shushed. At least have all of them with whispering text bubbles to explain why this took so long to happen. She says they've lost the school mascot Tarantula. Oh, the comic wasn't gutsy enough to have her die. She just ran away while she was cleaning up her cage for the carnival. She wonders what they're gonna do, and somehow thinks they're gonna be in trouble, even though she's talking to a witch. Why on earth wouldn't Sabrina just magically teleport the tarantula back to his cage? I guess the logic is she didn't memorize what it looked like exactly because it's a spider. There's been so many times where a witch didn't have all of the information, and they're still able to cast the spell correctly. The only point of her being a witch in the story seems to be that it justifies why she's around other supernatural beings. But they all act like normal people anyways, with normal lives, so if you ignore the cosmetic difference, it's just a really mundane story where the entertainment value of seeing magic is replaced with us seeing these things. You'd think she could also cast a spell to track the spider down. You could write the story where kids lose the school pet and have to manually track it down with regular mortals. I'd be surprised if this never happened before. At least the story takes advantage of Clara being an invisible person because she removed her clothes so that no one would see her and know she was involved. Wait, she was completely invisible with no clothes when Sabrina first met her. Apparently she just casually walks around without clothes just for fun sometimes because she can get away with it, and people aren't horrified about that for some reason. Before this, I just assumed her clothes were invisible. She naturally calls Ida out on being a tattletale to her for no reason. It's 15 minutes until 3. Who cares? Sabrina can freeze time and reverse it. Ida doesn't want Tessie the spider to end up stepped on in the hallway. So Sabrina says they'd better get snapping, which must be an outdated phrase that was common for teenagers to say at some point, to the point where it makes sense that she says it. But I've never heard it before. So it's just confusing and annoying that she says this because it only wastes our time with Jerome complaining about it because he has snake hair. Sabrina apologizes to him and smartly tells the girls to take the upstairs while she'll take the downstairs. She could also duplicate herself to send a version of herself down every hallway possible to try to find the spider. This is like the animated series. I shouldn't have to be the one thinking of all the magic here. Sabrina wonders where he'd go if he were a spider. She's told dance class. He's at least saying that he's guessing. Obviously the spider wouldn't have a specific target, let alone care about dance class. He says a spider could do all sorts of crazy steps, and wishes she left them a trail. Then Sabrina, rather than casting a spell so that they'd be able to see a trail and go to the spider, finds a strand of spider webbing. And all she has to do is follow it to the other end. It goes under the door of the chem lab. Despite the chemistry teacher clearly proving that he knows what it looks like, he says he hasn't seen it and wants to get back to work. And after he threatens to give them detention just for being suspicious of them, abusing his power, Jerome tells him his fly is open, and the spider can apparently recognize the word fly. Well, it is another realm spider, so it bursts down the door on top of him, and he's giant because the chemistry teacher made him the subject of his growth experiment. And there's no explanation for why he couldn't reduce the spider back to normal size in a school in the witch world. Sabrina's about to use magic, but gets stopped from it. Instead, Jerome gets a great idea. Their booth becomes the busiest one at the carnival because they kept the spider giant size and offered $3 for a ride on it. This story was about the school pet getting loose from its cage and the protagonist having to find it before it get hurt. I wonder if that's ever been written before. Sabrina doesn't use magic a single time in this one, missing the point entirely. The pet was a spider because it's a witch school and somehow they like spiders. The chemistry teacher is a mad scientist who makes the spider grow big on a whim irresponsibly because he's Dr. Frankenstein. And the ending at Sabrina's booth at the school carnival make a lot of money offering people rides from the giant spider because of him. Too bad the story didn't end with them getting fired for experimenting on the school mascot and trying to give someone detention for no reason. It's unappealing to look at a lot of these characters, so it goes without saying that it'd be nicer to look at magic instead. If you ignore how the characters look and the humorless jokes around it, it was just a cliche, boring plot where go figure they can follow a spider's webbing to find it. There's no explanation for why Sabrina doesn't use her witch powers, like to just warp the spider back into its cage. This might not be the right kind of story for a witch to have. It wouldn't be so bad if at the start of every Gravestone Heights story, it was explained that Sabrina ran out of magic from using it too much. It'd still be a little annoying, but at least there'd be an explanation instead of constant plot holes. Betty and Veronica 75. Sabrina suddenly says ESP in her dialogue, thinking that her ESP is telling her that the skier in front of her is going to get injured if he jumps. If she always had ESP, a lot of plots wouldn't have happened. So this is a different universe. Sadly, instead of her brainwashing him to decide to never ski again, or at least not do it this time, she's inexplicably dumb and merely teleports a cast and crutch to him and freaks him out. At least she did a good deed with magic again. Finally. Betty and Veronica Double Digest 44. A girl with Veronica's hair color but not her hairstyle runs away near Hilda and Sabrina, saying that there's something wrong with the motel hot tub. Hilda's surprised that it's a hot tub and says she's been using it as a cauldron. And there's a tentacle in there. Why didn't she zap up a cauldron? I have to assume the tentacles are in brews to add specific spells to the brew, but that's not said, so it always seems arbitrary, like they're only there to look gross. It's out of character for Sabrina to smile at this instead of feeling bad for the girl.